Joining me now, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House, New York Times bestselling author. His latest book, Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. Very timely, in fact. Mr. Gingrich, always good to have you. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, I'm delighted to be with you. These are certainly interesting times.
Very much so. And I want to get into that as well with your book, because I think that your book also answers a soundbite that we have that we're going to play for you regarding Ilhan Omar. But I have to get your response on this idea that in order for Trump and Biden to have these debates, that these prerequisites must be met. I feel as though the media is working with Democrats to try to get Joe Biden out of these debates. Every soundbite we have of him, and it's not like I'm trying to cherry pick. I'm being very gracious and trying to find things that I can actually use to determine policy and what his mood's going to be going into November. It's very difficult because he just sounds not all put together. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I don't know. He survived all the debates with Democrats, and of course that was a very short amount of time per appearance, but he did survive it. He didn't collapse. So you run a danger, I think, of underestimating him and getting people to a point where they think if he just walks on stage, he wins. And so I'd be very cautious about assuming Biden is incompetent. Having said that, I actually think Biden is incompetent. And I think all of his presidential campaigns have indicated that. But I think more importantly, the president just has to establish very big, bold goals. And then he has to draw a very sharp contrast, not just with Biden, but with the Biden-Pelosi-Schumer machine, and draw clearly the difference. I mean, I just tweeted a few minutes ago, because Biden is in Pennsylvania, he gratuitously announced that he would take on the nuns over this contraception issue. And I raised the question, why would you declare a war on nuns as a guy who claims to be a good Catholic while going into a state that has a lot of Catholics? And it's just weird. But he's now so totally committed to the anti-American left that I think that's got to be half of the Trump campaign. And the other half has to be what the president would do to make our lives better over the next 4 years.
Yeah, and I think having that solution is so important for voters to see. And I some of this, whenever I read, because it's very difficult for me to buy into a lot of the polling because 2016 was so wrong. It was just so incorrect. And I don't trust a lot of these media outlets that engage in this sort of gaslighting every single day with American voters to work with whatever polling entity it is and believe that what they're presenting us is an accurate or fair sample. But I keep hearing from some operatives, and I keep hearing from some strategists that the president needs to show that he's fighting more or that he is offering more solutions. I don't know that he could. To me, I don't see any difference in how hard he's fighting for voters now or the solutions that he's offering voters in order to combat the economic fallout from the pandemic. Where do you think that this criticism is coming from on the right?
Well, part of it's just nervousness. I mean, part of it is just people, as you said, people look at these polls and they start to panic and they try to come up with some clever device. I went back and looked at Charlie Cook, who probably is as good as there is in Washington at analyzing elections. The day before the election in 16, literally the day before, he had Hillary with 278 electoral votes, Trump with 214, and the rest up in the air. Now, it turned out, of course, that he was just wrong. But the same people, they earn a living by talking, and therefore they have to keep talking even if they don't know anything. I do think Trump should offer very big positive things. And I noticed that the other day he said he was in favor, for example, of a holiday on paying the payroll tax, which would be an enormous boon to small businesses and to working Americans. I think that he was very visionary in proposing transparency in healthcare, something which the hospitals are fighting bitterly and the insurance companies are fighting. But 88% of the country believes they have the right to know what the price is going to be before they do something.
Yeah.
So I think that there are issues he can lay out. And my view is the more this is an issue-oriented campaign, the worse off Biden is. We didn't beat McGovern and we didn't beat Mondale by just beating them up about personality. We beat them because we told people what they really stood for. The same thing happened with Dukakis. We didn't beat Dukakis, even though he looked funny riding in a tank. We beat Dukakis by proving to the country that he was a left-wing, slightly weird Massachusetts politician who would be a bad president. And I think the danger is when you get in with consultants that they try to become clever. And I think that the key here is not to be clever, it's to go to the fundamentals. This is how Trump will make your life better. This is how Biden will create a terrifying future. You pick which of these two you want. And if they drive it hard enough, and they make Biden defend all this stuff that he says. He apparently would legalize 11 million people almost overnight. The Democrats, 207 House Democrats voted for Pelosi's $3 trillion bill that would give $1,200 to every illegal immigrant. Now, how many Americans do you think believe it's smart to encourage entering the country illegally so you can get your $1,200?
Right.
I mean, this is the kind of stuff we can pin them to. And by the way, Biden has promised to sign that bill.
Goodness.
So that's the kind of stuff we can pin them to that I think just melts their support pretty dramatically.
Exactly. I love the point you make too about having too many consultants in. It's like they feel as though they need to bring something new to the table, and they create a situation where one doesn't exist. You just stick to the fundamentals, and not just with the illegal immigration and rewarding illegal entry, but the tax rates that Biden is proposing. My goodness, and the lack of concern for law and order, and his ineffectiveness and really refusal to stand up to communist China. All of these are huge issues that the administration could get him on, which I know you get into your book, Trump and the American Future. We're talking with Newt Gingrich, solving the great problems of our time. I want to play this soundbite. I know you're familiar with it, Mr. Gingrich. I want to make sure that our audience hears it because you had a great response to this on Twitter, and I want to explore that. This was Ilhan Omar just yesterday talking about the need to remake the United States. Listen.
As long as our economy and political systems prioritize profit without considering who is profiting, who is being shut out, we will perpetuate this inequality. So we cannot stop at criminal justice system. We must begin the work of dismantling the whole system of oppression wherever we find it.
An odd statement for a sitting member of Congress to make, considering they take an oath to uphold the Constitution, and incredibly ironic considering there are six figures, hundreds of thousands of dollars that her campaign has now given her new husband's consulting firm when she talks about transparency with money. But I love, we're talking with Newt Gingrich, whose new book, Trump and the American Future, is out. I love, Mr. Gingrich, your response to this. Ilhan Omar was born in Mogadishu, spent part of her childhood in a refugee camp. She and her family were accepted by the United States, and in one generation, she's become a congresswoman. Why is she so angry at America? Gratitude might have been better than rage as a response. But it is that remaking, because this isn't a protest. This is the left's revolution. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think she's a fascinating case study because we know that Somalia is a mess, has been a mess. We know that her role as a woman in Somalia would be dramatically more limited and difficult than here. And you have to wonder, it's almost a psychological problem. But you're right, she somehow became part of the left. The left hates America, has always hated America. Part of the challenge we have, and I wrote about this in my newsletter, which is free at Gingrich 360, and I did a piece on 3 generations of brainwashing because it really goes all the way back to Herbert Marcuse at Berkeley in the early 1960s. And you've gotten every generation since then has become more radical, more anti-American. The number of professors who identify as Marxist is about 20 times the number who identify as Republicans. And these people get up every morning and they think their mission in life is to profoundly, fundamentally change America. And you look at Venezuela, you look at what happened to Argentina, you look at Cuba, And you have to wonder, what planet do these people live on? But and she's a perfect case study because she has profited from the system in so many different ways. You sort of think she ought to just relax, go on vacation, but part of her shtick is being this outrageously angry. And my point is, people who are that angry have a psychological problem, but two, why is she here? I mean, if America's this terrible, I am sure Mogadishu would welcome her with open arms, and she would have a triumphal reentry if she wanted to she could improve Mogadishu.
Yeah.
But she won't, of course, because the truth is that Somalia would be much more hostile to her than is Minnesota.
Well, definitely so. Your book, Trump and the American Future, you get into what we have actually at stake coming up here in November in 2020, which seems insane that we're so close to this. I not to engage in hyperbole, and I know this is almost said of every single election, but considering everything that we've seen in the streets, the rhetoric that we've heard from a party that used to always put its moderate foot forward, now you can tell that the super far left, that's the policy, that's the platform, they're running things. What is at stake? I'm trying not to be a cynic, but I feel as though liberty is at stake coming up in 2020. And as I've said, I know that's been so often discussed with every election, but I honestly think that this is the election of elections. And you discuss these stakes in your book. Last question for you.
Yeah.
Lay out what really we need to keep in mind going into November as you write in your book.
Look, I wrote Trump and the American Future because I believe this is the most consequential election since the two Lincoln elections of 1860 and 1864. I think the difference between a world defined by Biden, Pelosi, and Schumer and a world defined by Trump and McConnell and McCarthy, the difference is so enormous. I think they will, in fact, use the power of government, just as Biden announced that he was going to use the government to go after the nuns on the contraception issue, which you have to think is almost weird. But they have a compulsion to be totalitarians. They're already showing it on campuses. They had a young lady who was almost driven off of Marquette University for having indicated she liked Donald Trump. So you're not just talking about people who are worried about homophobia or they're worried about racism. They are going to try to coerce this country into being exactly what they decide we should be, and they're prepared to punish us if we don't do what they want. Now that's what's at stake. I mean, if you want to have a classic America where you have freedom, where the Constitution matters, and your rights come from God, the only possible vote in November is Donald Trump. If you're willing to have an America which is stunningly anti-religious, largely anti-American, despises the police, loves the criminals, then you ought to vote for Biden and the Democrats, because that's what they're doing. I mean, we just had 152 Americans shot in New York and Chicago in one weekend. And the Democrats have become the party that believes in releasing criminals, ideally not even arresting them, abolishing the police, and creating a vacuum in which predators engage in violence. I mean, it is really, truly astonishing. And of course, the propaganda media, which has replaced the news media, does everything it can to protect the left and to attack Trump. So it's much harder today than it would have been 20 or 30 years ago to have this fight, because you know that most of the media is actually the dedicated agent of the people who would destroy America.
Which is frightening. No longer the watchdog for the people, indeed. The book is Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. Newt Gingrich, always a pleasure. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks for your time today.